Итак, мы продолжаем цикл дискуссий с международными экспертами в рамках проекта Utalks.Boundaryless. University, первый университет креативных индустрий в России, продолжает цикл лекций, который проходит при поддержке Отдела культуры и образования Посольства Великобритании в Москве. Сегодня мы будем говорить о креативном предпринимательстве. Рада представить вам участников нашей сегодняшней лекции. Шон Прайм, исполнительный директор Института креативного и культурного предпринимательства университета Goldsmiths, University of London, работает с компаниями в креативных индустриях с целью поиска для них эффективных финансовых моделей. Наш модератор сегодняшней сессии Екатерина Черкес-заде, директор первого в России университета креативных индустрий Universal University. Итак, наша лекция проходит на английском языке с синхронным переводом на русский. Екатерина будет давать вопросы на русском языке. Вы можете выбрать тот язык, который вам предпочтителен внизу экрана. Нажмите на значок земного шара, чтобы выбрать дорожку, или английскую, или русскую. И, пожалуйста, задавайте свои вопросы спикерам на русском или на английском языках в чате. Мы обязательно передадим все вопросы коллегам, и вы обязательно получите ответы на свой вопрос. Пожалуйста, пишите в чат, и, Екатерина, передаю вам слово.
Даш, спасибо огромное. Я всех приветствую. Очень приятно в этот вечер поговорить про креативную экономику, про будущее, которое ждет и нас вообще, и креативных предпринимателей в частности. И, Шон, добро пожаловать. Спасибо большое, что присоединились к нашему разговору сегодня, потому что ваш опыт и экспертиза в данном случае невероятно интересны. Шон, пожалуйста, расскажите о себе, о своем опыте разработки программ по развитию предпринимательства для студентов и выпускников Goldsmiths. Для меня лично очень интересен этот вопрос. У нас тоже очень много выпускников. Очень интересно, если вы поделитесь опытом. И, конечно, мой второй вопрос: какие трудности вообще сейчас встречают наши выпускники, когда выходят в большой мир и когда решают открыть собственный бизнес? Расскажите, пожалуйста.
Thank you so much, Ekaterina, and thank you so much, Dasha, and everybody that's supported me in being here to talk with you. I'm really delighted to share some of my experiences. I'll say a few words and then I'll go to a presentation, because otherwise I tend to get way too enthusiastic about my subject. So it's good to keep me focused. So my experience, I've been at Goldsmiths now, I believe, about 12 years, and which feels like a long time for me, but I think in academia, I'm still relatively new to academia. And I joined Goldsmiths from the creative industries. I had run my own company, and I had spent, you can see from the colour of my hair, quite a few years developing and supporting cultural and creative entrepreneurs. And I had seen a lot of the challenges that they faced. And for me, one of the key ones was that they left at their creative peak. And that's not a challenge, that's a fantastic opportunity. So students are developed in critical and creative thinking at their university, and then they leave, and that network isn't there for them to support their continued creative development. But also there's the fear of, how do you take this extraordinary creative offering out to audiences, to clients, and to let it see its potential? And so in a way, I've seen that as the driving force for my teaching and my research and the support that I do globally for creatives. So, and it's hard, but I think one of the things that this last year has taught us is, although artists don't always feel valued, I think this last year has shown us that audiences really value creative content, and it's absolutely been crucial, I think, with coronavirus, with COVID, people have turned to online content in ways that we've never seen before. So I feel like our journey together in working on creativity is beginning with a different sort of energy. So if I may, I will start sharing my screen, and I will try and keep an eye on time, and I'll talk you through some of the background to my work and some of the people I've met along the way, and share some of the adventures as well as the learning. So here we are. This squiggle and blue sky is actually one of the sculptures on one of the roofs of a Goldsmiths building. It's quite iconic, and it becomes very recognizable as part of Goldsmiths. But I think it's also it's quite a nice metaphor in a way for creative entrepreneurship. I think seeing art against nature, seeing a tangle of lines and opportunity against a blue sky. It seems to me that we are constantly dealing in the creative economy and with cultural and creative entrepreneurs. We're dealing with two things, and I've deliberately been a little bit cheeky in the way that I phrase this, but the E word and the L word. We need to develop confidence, and we need to be okay with change in our sector. And when I first started this journey around creative entrepreneurship, enterprise, entrepreneurship, and art were seen as oil and water. They should not mix. Enterprise was seen as perhaps a dirty word, that if you're entrepreneurial in your thinking, that perhaps you weren't a strong artist, perhaps it in a way impacted the work that you make. And I think that's changing, because equally in the creative sector, we have been entrepreneurs since the beginning of time. Independent artists, composers, writers have always had to navigate systems and structures to get their work seen and heard. And the other word that was quite problematic for some people was the word of leadership. And we look in our courses at developing people to be able to lead a sector, to be able to lead the development of an art form, lead themselves, as well as lead organisations. I would be not being true to myself if I didn't at this point reflect on the fact that the majority of people who study at Goldsmiths are female, and the majority of people worldwide who study the creative industries tend to be women. Unfortunately, in the UK, the number of women leaders of our cultural sector are very low. So there are challenges where we have to look at how do we develop that confidence to be able to step forward, to find new ways of working, new robust organisations, and for the talent that is in our sector, and particularly the talented women in our sector, I would say, to come forward and to be able to make the most of their opportunities. This is a prompt which I love. So this is The Fighting Temeraire, a painting by an English and a very English painter, Turner. And I put this one here because the story of this painting is that the large ship is being tugged to dock by that smaller ship at the front. And it's being tugged to dock for the last time because the Temeraire is no longer relevant. It is large, it's unwieldy, it doesn't use modern fuel, it hasn't adapted to modern technology. So it's being tugged in by a smaller, more powerful ship to be broken up into firewood. And I've put that because it seems to me that unless we adapt and unless we embrace different forms of technology, different forms of communication, we will become the Fighting Temeraire as a sector, as individuals. And so one of the things that is a joy and a privilege for me is that my job means that I'm constantly learning, constantly engaging with new ways of thinking, with people who are adapting to technology in ways that I wouldn't. So I hope that I will never become that Fighting Temeraire and dragged into dock. But I think it's that skill of constant curiosity, constant questioning, that means that we have to adapt our way of working to the environment, and the environment then will adapt to us. And that, for me, seems to be one of the core things and principles of the way that we teach at Goldsmiths, is develop your curiosity, question things, keep learning, keep challenging, and make sure that your creative instincts don't become left behind, that we carry on pushing forward rather than being pulled out to dock. I think many of us can think of people, practitioners, who carry on without perhaps refreshing their practice. We can't do it. We need to keep moving forward. And then I've put this with a banknote above the image, because for me, I think the constant challenge for practitioners is to balance money and meaning. And if we can do that well, then we have cultural entrepreneurship. So for me, money is whatever money is needed to make the work at the standard that it requires, plus enough money, whatever enough means for you, to live well, to live healthily, and to be able to ensure that you can make the next piece of work well and healthily too. It's always difficult, I think, when artists start in their career to be able to charge the level they should and to get that pricing level correct. And that's, again, part of the teaching that we do, is looking at how we position our worth and how we ensure that that value is created and honoured and respected. So balancing money and meaning is perhaps a lifetime journey, but something that we have to be very comfortable with. And I know that, of course, in critical theory, there are many writers who've written about this, Adorno, Bourdieu, and written about the complexities. But actually, as long as there is strong intention, I think we move forward with confidence. But it's never an easy journey. It always has ups and downs. And we have to have confidence that we will be able to rise through again. And again, this image is more complex than it first appears, because you first of all see the ups and downs of cultural entrepreneurship. But then you can also see to the side the landscape. And I think being able to see different opportunities from that main land, that main road, is another key factor of cultural entrepreneurship. And we also look in our teaching at a thing called soft fascination, which is when you allow your brain to be distracted enough to allow new thinking, new connections to happen. So there's a lot in our teaching which is, some people would just call it well-being, but actually it's more than this. It's around, how do we keep making new thoughts? How do we keep those connections? And part of that is relearning how we play, create, and making that part of our professional practice when we leave college, rather than just a discipline within university. And I said at the beginning that part of this journey was informed by me wondering what happens to people when they graduate. How do they keep at their creative best? And so I've got a very old-fashioned photograph of somebody surveying that landscape, looking for talent and looking for that boldness. It's important, I think, for all of us that we keep looking for these new opportunities. And this picture was inspired by my mentor, who was a film producer. And he was saying that he doesn't believe it's true that audiences and customers and clients want the less interesting creative offer. They want to be surprised. They want you to be bold. So let's keep that boldness as we go forward, but make sure that it's underpinned with structures that allow us to be at our most creative. And that's where the entrepreneurship thinking comes, that we have to put these structures in place for ourselves as we emerge from institutions. And we also have to create new ways of thinking within existing institutions to take that forward. And this is in Kew Gardens in London. It's an artwork made by Wolfgang Buttress, and it's showing a hive. It's showing the need for connection, the need for interplay, and also how art now has to be so many things and can be so many things. This is a place for relaxation, it's a place for music making, it's a place for making honey. But what it is crucially is a space that only works when we come together with difference, with intention, to make sure that we create these networks of trust that ensure our thinking goes further forward. And this is a slide to remind me to talk more about diversity of thinking. I'm there back in the day when I could travel, and I'm in Uganda, and I'm surrounded by 30 fashion designers from 5 different countries. And these are incredible men and women creating new ways of working, new ways of owning their heritage and turning it into new forms of fashion. Some of them are working with people who live in poor slums in Nairobi. Some of them are working now in Paris and creating work that has just been in various London and Paris fashion shows. The energy, the diversity of thinking is really apparent there. And if we don't keep that and create those networks around us, then our work doesn't survive well. But the other reason that I've put this photograph here is it reminds me of the very first question I was asked on day 1 of a 5-day workshop I did. The first question I was asked was, could I tell them everything about fashion in the UK and how it works in the West? And my heart sank, because there's nothing worse than being asked to replicate something from the UK in a different system and structure. And I said, well, why do you want to know that? And Moses at the back said, because we think you've got it wrong and we want to learn from your mistakes so that we don't make them. And I think that's one of the best pieces of learning, is countries like the UK developed the creative economy very early on, and we decided what was in or out of the creative economy, and that's been adopted by many countries. And there's a lot that we got right. There's even more that we've got wrong. Learn from our mistakes so that you don't have to make them. And I think that's something in our teaching style in the UK, is we're very honest and open about what we've got right, as well as the less good practice. Interestingly, Kenya is the one country worldwide where the indigenous local patterns are protected by intellectual property. Nowhere else in the world has thought about supporting and protecting that local knowledge and that knowledge made by communities. So this is a quote actually from a book by a writer called Dan Pink, and it's about drive. What motivates you? And he says that they're most motivated when they feel autonomous, when they are developing their mastery and they're clear about their purpose. And that seems to me to be something that creative and cultural entrepreneurs and arts practitioners are very strong at. Being autonomous, it makes educating them a wonderful challenge. They want to constantly seek better knowledge and get better at their craft. And they are driven highly by purpose. The key bit around entrepreneurship is around learning to delegate and to collaborate much more, which is why that was the theme of many of my earlier slides. Because the more we stay too autonomous, the smaller our work is. So developing that skill is something that we've developed programs at Goldsmiths to do alongside the creative education in our more traditional disciplines. And play. Remember to play, to make your ideas big, to make them visual. So this is a photograph of one of our first workshops in Goldsmiths that we would normally do, where we ask people to map their networks and to map their opportunities and to map their assets and to make it visible, visual, and tangible. And then to play with that idea and to see what's possible with new connections. How can those connections ensure that we move our work further forward and that we become more stable? It's important that when we're educating in the arts and design, that we look at mistake and failure while we're at college, while we're at university. Because if we can make all the mistakes that are possible within the support of a university setting, then as you graduate, those mistakes won't happen. So we very much see developing entrepreneurship in the way that we would see developing art and design in a lab, so that we can make mistakes, we can challenge our new thinking, so we can go forward afterwards in a stronger way. Oh, this is perhaps a very Western image. I'd almost forgotten I'd got this one in. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. This, I was told, is the dream team. And it's for people who are a lot younger than me and perhaps not obsessed with sci-fi. It's 4 people from the 1970s, 60s, television series that got recreated into a film, Star Trek. And it shows 4 of the key people on the Starship Enterprise. So it has people here who I think one would think that Captain Kirk, the guy at the front with the quiff, is the ideal cultural entrepreneur, constantly going to new places, constantly seeking new challenges. But without those other 3, he would just go round and round in circles, because without Spock being logical and being logistical, without Uhura, the woman, without her being able to interpret and being able to translate, nobody would understand what he's doing. And at the back, you've got the doctor who looks after people physically and also emotionally. So unless you have that team around you, then the creativity, the rule breaking, just becomes rule breaking rather than a supported structure. So learning to create that team so that you're not totally autonomous, or develop those different skills yourself, make it easier, I think, as you take your work forward. I'm going to talk through a couple more case studies and then open up for some questions. So this is a case study of an artist that I met when I worked at an organisation called Nesta. And Nesta is an endowment fund based in the UK. And this was the idea of a live arts practitioner, Georg, who thought it was interesting how we needed memorials for people after they had died, and also how we often would plant a tree in memory of somebody. So he thought it would be interesting if he put human DNA into a tree and grew a tree with human beings' DNA in it. So it became a living memorial to that person. And he wanted to do this for lots of reasons. He wanted to do it as a piece of living art. He wanted to do it because he wanted us to question science. And he wanted to do it because he wanted us to question what it is to have a memory. But working with Georg meant that we could look at this as, rather than just one tree, could this be a new way of doing memorials? Could this be a new way of understanding science? Could it be a new way of interpreting science? So it becomes something bigger than one object of art. And through doing that, Georg has been able to have a long-term livelihood. And this is a woman, Eleanor Ford, who is also one of our advisors at the Institute for Creative and Cultural Entrepreneurship at Goldsmiths. And Ellie worked as a social scientist, and she collaborated with technologists. So she brought the emotional intelligence to the computer technologists to create a number of different solutions that are based on instinct and intuitive behavior rather than based on logic. So bringing together those different ways of collaborating. And this picture is of a jewellery shop and workshop in Glasgow. Glasgow has some of the best silversmith courses, and Glasgow University develops amazing architects and jewellers as well as artists. The problem is, in Glasgow, there was nowhere for them to sell their work and no route to market. So Sarah, at 21, worked with me to open a shop, a series of workshops and spaces for young jewellers to make their work, as well as a way of developing markets for innovative, complex contemporary jewellery. So rather than her cohort of young designers moving to London, where there was that network, she created that physical space and was pioneering enough to develop something and risk something to do that. I'll skip past her. There's a downloadable toolkit for people who want it. The Nesta toolkit continues. And then came my journey into Goldsmiths, where my goal is to integrate all of that thinking into our way of working, collaborating with all of our departments. So it's a slightly pixelated photo of our wonderful College Green, where you can see our students from different departments are constantly thinking and playing and talking together. And it's about creating that sense of community and embedding entrepreneurial thinking, the creation of value and the intent to take that value forward to new audiences, that with my colleague Gerald, who I know is in the audience, we work to embed in all of our programs. So we have master's programs where we do this, undergraduate programs, and then we also offer both modules and unaccredited training to every student at Goldsmiths so that they can leave with confidence that they have their own route map forward and their own sets of networks to take their thinking forward. So, for example, we've worked with Julie Lee, who is a fashion manager in Korea and has won awards at international fashion showcases. She graduated, and within the first year, she had turnover of over $250,000 and profit of £50,000 that year, in developing new forms of collaboration between Korean designers and European designers and markets. We have Jeremy Young, who is an independent music artist who has done two things. He continues to make his work, he's just released a new album, and he also collaborates with new writers to develop new forms of audiobooks with music as well as the writing. And then his third enterprise is Soundfly. Soundfly is a way to make music better, to collaborate in producing, in writing, and to learn how to develop your own music practice further. So he has realized that as a complex music artist, he needs more than one income stream. And this is his way of working across 3 different businesses to support himself. We have Stefano, who created an animation company called Nuco Brain. He created this when he was on the program that I run. He's the guy in the center of his own drawing of his company. And he did this because he realized it's really hard for animators to be employed, to collaborate, and to constantly be working on new products. So Nuco Brain works with a corporate market to tell their stories through cartoons, but it also works in the high art level as well. And most of this is done over conversation and food. We were talking earlier when we were waiting for the technical difficulties about how actually food and gastronomy should really be one of the additional areas of the creative industries. Our students work really hard and then they party really hard. And even in lockdown, they're creating evening brunches, evening meetups and dinners. They're sharing their cooking and knowledge, and they're keeping these connections. And we see increasingly that our creative entrepreneurs sometimes don't want to create new artwork. They want to transfer their thinking into something for social innovation and social change. And they're working, as I said earlier, a lot with technologists, but this time to create tech for good solutions. we're also working and collaborating with the Deutsche Bank, and we've been advising them on how to support creative entrepreneurs to take their work forward and how to fund it. Because we see ourselves in a really interesting position at Goldsmiths, where we have insight and we have such expertise and such amazing students and collaborators coming to work with us, that we need to sometimes give some of our knowledge away so that we get new knowledge and collaborate in new ways. So what next? Well, at the moment, we are looking at totally new ways of the creative industries working while we emerge from lockdown, new ways to collaborate, new demand for creative content. And we're developing, I think, at least 3 new programs in our institute. But the answer for what next is we need to revisit how our creative industries run, because this lockdown has put a lot of them in a very vulnerable position. And we need to be thinking differently in the way that we educate and bring this further forward. So what's next is lots of challenges and lots of opportunities, and hopefully your questions. So I will stop sharing now and see if any of that made sense and if anyone has any questions. And thank you for that time. Thank you, Armia.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Это вдохновляющая, абсолютно вдохновляющая презентация. Спасибо огромное. У меня есть очень конкретный вопрос. Изменились ли или появились новые бизнес-модели, которые можно было наблюдать во время постпандемии? Мне кажется, что год прошлый, 2020 год, был настолько необычным, что очень многие коллеги, наши выпускники, либо отказались от идеи собственного бизнеса, или как-то переставили это решение на какой-то другой срок, более поздний, либо наоборот появлялось большое количество прорывных идей. Есть ли у вас какие-то примеры подобного рода новых бизнес-моделей, которые сейчас появились в креативных индустриях?
Yes, I do. So we have definitely seen that some of the more traditional business models have struggled. And interestingly, I think we are also seeing, sadly, organizations that relied on sponsorship and grants struggled less than organizations that relied on ticket money, because there have been less tickets to buy with things being closed. But I've seen a really beautiful example where one of our entrepreneurial fellows, Drew McConey, who is a dance artist, the week after lockdown started, he took his company class online to Instagram to start with. So instead of having 30 dancers attending his classes, he suddenly had 30,000 dancers attending his classes on Instagram. And he is a smart man, and he realized that there is a way to monetize that and to open his class through technology, so that people can, even people like me, can take their camera off and do a Drew McConey class, which for me was a real privilege. So he's suddenly developed a new income stream from his dance classes in ways that he thought he wouldn't. He's also used some of that money to develop new forms of scholarship for young dance artists who create work, and to create work deliberately for camera. So I think those challenges are very real. I think the need to adapt and to just be determined to keep making work and to engage with audiences drives people to very new business models. Of course, using technology is an imperative right now. Although I have also seen some extraordinary works of art being made, both either as performances or drawn work locally. So I think there's much more of a feeling of understanding and embracing local communities as well as global communities. And Yeah, the timing is really interesting. I would say right now is as good a time as any to start your own enterprise as an artist, because right now conventional businesses are having a worse time. So I would use this time to explore, to experiment, and to take that work forward, because I think now is the time that we need risk, and now is the time that audiences really want to access content. And content sometimes feels like a demeaning word, but we need to be uplifted, particularly people like in countries like mine where we've been in lockdown for a year now. So do it is my short answer.
Есть интересный вопрос про предпринимательство, когда мы говорим про то, что предпринимательство не преподается в школах. Часто говорят, что предпринимателям нужно родиться, есть какой-то ген предпринимательства, люди, которые могут делать проекты или нет. Часто бывает так, что молодые люди не всегда понимают, какие навыки им нужны, чтобы стать предпринимателем. И как вы думаете, как можно изменить эту ситуацию? И в связи с этим вопрос, как успешные выпускники ваших предпринимательских программ участвуют в менторской системе, которая есть в Goldsmiths, существует ли такая система наставничества, как это работает? Вот два таких вопроса одновременно.
Thank you, Katerina. Two great questions, of course. So I'm often told that entrepreneurship can't be developed, it's innate in somebody and it doesn't need to be taught. And that to me is the same as saying that you can't teach somebody to be an artist, you can't teach somebody to be a dancer, you can't teach somebody to be a singer. We know that creative spark, whatever it is stronger and better in some people. We know that some of that is their social condition, but some of it is just. If I were to draw you a picture now, you would not thank me at all. And if I was to sing to you right now, you would not thank me at all. But I do have other creative skills, and I have them because they have been developed by good teachers. And I feel the same is true with enterprise. There are some people who are going to find some elements more naturally appealing, so problem solving, very similar to being a designer, very similar to being a dance artist, I would say, is you're constantly solving problems. And if you take that instinct and give it the right frameworks and structures, of course it will improve. And it feels to me that it is, and this is why I love teaching enterprise in a school like Goldsmiths, which is only teaching arts, humanities, and social sciences. So we're in a place where we question society, we question structures, we problem solve, we look for new opportunities. That's for me enterprise. We just need the frameworks to support people to take that forward so that their ideas reach the scale that they can do. So I feel like I'm teaching people to engage with frameworks and structures rather than teaching people to be an entrepreneur, because I feel like that entrepreneurial instinct is in a way there with the sorts of audiences I have. And then the second question was about mentoring. So we have a very strong tradition, particularly in our Institute for Creative and Cultural Entrepreneurship, of asking our alumni to come back and talk to our students, to provide work placements for them, to provide work for them. The example of Nuco Brain, annually he employs at least 2 of our graduates, and he definitely comes and inspires our students as well as the other people that I mentioned. And we have an online network of our Goldsmiths alumni that our students can tap into to find a mentor within. And I think one of the interesting things is, I think you never quite know how much you know until you're asked to talk about it. So I think that's one of the great things about being a guest lecturer or mentoring somebody, is you suddenly know yourself how far you've traveled. And it causes you to actually have conscious understanding of what you had thought you didn't know. So yeah, our mentoring is we have ways of supporting people. We also have our staff give a lot of time to continue mentoring students and alumni, because why wouldn't you? You've invested strongly in their development at early stages. So we work to make sure that that continues.
Еще один вопрос, на мой взгляд, очень интересный. Как вы считаете, есть ли отличия в подходах к предпринимательству в креативных индустриях и предпринимательству в целом? Мы постоянно говорим о том, и вот здесь, в России, мы тоже очень часто говорим о том, что на самом деле мы скорее преодолеваем барьер с креативных профессионалов для того, чтобы они начали собственный бизнес, потому что у них тоже есть такое ощущение, что это не совсем про обычный бизнес. Есть ли какие-то отличия, и если они есть, то как вы их определяете?
A rich question. I hope I give it as strong an answer as it deserves. I think some of those issues are around scale. I think a lot of creative practitioners don't want to grow their idea beyond themselves because, for example, this necklace that I'm wearing is made by, I think, a very fun jeweler. She doesn't want anybody else to make these. So while there is potentially a business where she could make a wax mold, a factory could make them, it could scale, we could all be wearing cherry necklaces. That's not the business she wants to run. And I think that is very unusual. The creative sector tends to have more people who want to hold all the parts of that business. So I think perhaps the motivation around constantly exploring the creative practice is stronger in our businesses, and that keeps the scale smaller. Whereas I think an entrepreneur who comes from a different sector and perhaps just their motivation is to make money, that's what they will do. So I think it starts with that motivation. I think too, there are some issues around whether our infrastructure fully understands the type of businesses that come from our sector. So whether that's accountants, whether it's contracts around intellectual property, whether it's bank loans, whether it's when a grant is needed in a creative business, as opposed to when a startup grant or loan is needed in another form of business. Those things are, because we are a minority compared to shops, manufacturers and farming, those business models are understood by our infrastructure and governments much more than the creative sector's businesses are. And that's why we have to come together as a network, because then we can educate the rest of the infrastructure and then we can ensure that we're in a stronger position.
Да, Шон, я хотела также задам, наверное, последний вопрос на сегодня, мы уже тоже задержались по времени. Есть достаточно интересный вопрос, связанный с тем, как в целом вы видите эффекты предпринимательства в области креативных индустрий на другие сферы экономики. Сейчас много говорят о том, что именно подходы из креативных индустрий активно внедряются в компаниях, которые раньше не могли даже применить такой подход. Это и дизайн мышления, и навыки командной работы, и agile, и другие вещи, которые активно интегрируются сначала в IT или из IT дальше уже идут в...
Absolutely. So we know that there has been a huge spillover effect of creative thinking and the skills that have been developed, such as design thinking, into tech, into policy making, into a health service, the way that they work. So one of the things that we know is that creative skills are being seen. So if people don't want to be entrepreneurs, we know that conventional businesses are employing creative graduates and or are doing things like with NucoBrain, large-scale multinationals are getting in touch with animators saying, tell us our story differently, help us to communicate differently. So design thinking as a problem-solving solution for policymakers, for the National Health Service, for tech companies, absolutely. People asking drama practitioners to help them understand stories. There's a fantastic story that Gerald could tell you about a young people's theatre company teaching toy manufacturers how to play again. Because how can you design for children if you've forgotten how to play? As well as the more clear things, like the storytelling as a leadership skill. There's another example which I love, which is of somebody I work with who is a fashion designer who particularly does knitwear. And she was approached to do some consultancy for Philips because they wanted to know how she could weave textiles together in a particular way, because then they could take that into their wiring. So there are so many different ways that creative skills, and again, it comes back to problem solving, curiosity, and our ability to move a set of skills and critical thinking into a new area. So yeah, we're very much in demand, and we should have confidence in our sector, absolutely.
Спасибо, Шон. Я задам последний вопрос. У нас достаточно много вопросов тут накопилось. Один из самых интересных. Вот наш зритель, слушатель открыл сайт Goldsmiths и увидел, что все программы, которые представлены в Goldsmiths, работают по направлениям креативных индустрий. Верите ли вы в междисциплинарность и каким образом предполагаете будущее университета, если верите в междисциплинарность?
Thank you again. Almost one of my favorite questions ever. So I think cultural entrepreneurship in a way becomes transdisciplinary. It has to be something that goes across every discipline. And then the interdisciplinary work, when we run our MA in creative and cultural entrepreneurship, we have 7 pathways because we see such interesting things that happen because we teach all the pathways together for 50% of the program. So we see the different skills, the different knowledge, and people then creating new forms of collaboration. When I started the program, I thought of all the obvious ones, like a theatre practitioner needing a designer to help with certain aspects of the work, being able to collaborate with media practitioners to communicate the work. But you see people coming together and creating new forms of collaboration and new forms of businesses through these different ways of thinking. And then we also see people questioning the way that those different industries and sectors work. So you can see a musician questioning a fashion designer, why do you make work that way? Why 2 collections? Why this many? And you can see those different forms of questioning and changing in industries. So that's really important. But at heart, and I don't tell many people this, at heart I'm a traditionalist. So I see interdisciplinarity, I see transdisciplinary, I see collaboration. But I think you have to be expert in what you're expert in before you start that process of collaboration and before you start that process of collaboration and creating new forms of discipline. So what I love about Goldsmiths, and I believe the same is true in your university, is we're developing very skilled practitioners, and they're often called T-shaped practitioners, where they become very strong, but we can reach out and collaborate. So I love transdisciplinary, I love interdisciplinary, but I think that comes, and this is where I am old-fashioned and traditionalist, that comes when you have the beginnings of the roots of that practice in place, and then you can grow and collaborate and cross-pollinate and have fun.
Это прекрасный финал нашей сегодняшней дискуссии. Спасибо огромное, Шон. Мне невероятно приятно было сегодня послушать вашу презентацию. Все это невероятно вдохновляет. Мы назвались университетом не так давно. Нашему университету уже 18 лет, но всего лишь 3,5 года, как мы называемся университетом креативных индустрий. До этого мы развивались как отдельные школы. И вот сейчас эти вопросы, которые вы озвучиваете, для нас невероятно актуальны, и, я уверена, актуальны для всего креативного сообщества в России. Спасибо вам огромное. У нас сегодня еще такой небольшой прелонч, потому что буквально через несколько дней мы объявим об открытии факультета U-Business, который будет заниматься предпринимательством, и мы очень рады, что этот факультет запускается именно сейчас, в постпандемию, и на территории университета креативных индустрий. Так что для нас невероятно полезен ваш опыт, и я уверена, что мы еще найдем много точек пересечения в будущем. Спасибо вам огромное.
Thank you so much, and I hope this is the beginning of a collaboration. I'm so pleased to be invited. Thank you very, very much.
Спасибо большое, Шон. Дорогие друзья, спасибо. Это был Utalks. Как обычно, каждую среду мы в течение всего года говорим о креативном предпринимательстве, креативных индустриях. Ждем вас на нашей следующей сессии. Огромное вам спасибо. Всем всего доброго. Спасибо.